Hello, and welcome back to another video. Today's video are stories about black-eyed kids, and the last few stories are about black-eyed adults. Before I start the video, I would like to thank everyone. I was monetized on Sunday, and I couldn't have done it without all you. Also, I have 2 new merch items out. The thumbnail picture for this video, also a group design with my friends and mentors, Swamp Dweller, Being Scared, and Slumber Reads. The link is in the description. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. I recently read a story about black-eyed kids. This story felt like a twist tale of deja vu. I believe I have encountered the black-eyed kids before. I've never mentioned this particular detail about the eyes to anyone, for fear that they would think I'm fabricating the story or going crazy. This incident took place about 13 years ago. I had just moved into the new city with my wife. We were small town newlyweds from the Midwest, and we moved across country to one of the biggest cities in the Southwest so I could attend graduate school. Being naive to new city living, I would answer the door without a second thought, but never again after this. The first thing that should have tipped me off to the oddness of the situation was the fact that someone was knocking at 6 a.m. in the morning. The second thing that should have dawned on me is that this kid had to reach over a rather tall patio gate to unlatch it and open it. The knock on the door was startling. My wife and I were getting ready for work, a pretty normal routine. The moment I opened the door, I was overtaken with a sense of fear. To this day, I can picture him. Teenager, average height, average build, knee-length black leather coat, sort of black hair, and sunglasses. The sunglasses at 6 a.m. struck me as odd, and even more odd, he was eating an apple. He was very polite and asked me if he could come in to warm up. I told him no and closed the door and slid the security chain into place. A moment later, another knock. I opened the now chained door, and before I could speak, he asked me if he could come in again to warm up. No, I replied, and attempted to close the door. Before the door could shut, he put his hand out, stopping the door at its hinges. He looked at me directly in the eyes, still wearing his sunglasses, and said, "Can I at least get some ketchup for my apple?" "Screw that," I replied, being completely confused. "Get the hell out of here. My wife is calling the police." He takes a moment to let the information sink in, lowers his glasses, revealing extremely black eyes. "No, you won't be calling anybody." At that moment, I forced the door closed, locked it, and called my wife. She is screaming shitless and hiding in the bedroom. All jacked up on adrenaline, I ripped the curtains back to look out the window next to the door. He's gone. Absolutely no trace of him. I go out to the patio and check the gate. It's still latched from the inside. That's not right, I think to myself, and turn to enter the house when I noticed a half-bitten apple laying on the ground. I had a black-eyed kid experience once. I've always been tuned in to the supernatural things, but never heard of black-eyed kids before. It was probably 2007-ish, and I was working in an office by myself. The office was in a sketchy part of downtown, and I would keep the door locked as we were mostly doing B2B sales. I decided it was about lunchtime. It was a habit of mine to look through the window before I unlocked the door, because we were next to extremely low-income apartments, and one of the dudes there had creeped me, a woman in my 20s at the time, completely out on more than one occasion. I looked out the window to see some kid walking down the street. He was wearing a flannel, and it was a bit too warm out for those clothes. I decided to let him pass before I opened the door to walk to my car. In a blink of an eye, they were at my door. They could have not walked that quickly, or even sprinted to get there from where they were to my office door that quickly. Our window had a film on them that let me see outside, but the person couldn't see in. They looked about 14 and were banging on the door. One of them said, "Let us in, lady. We need to call our mom." I was overcome by fear. I just felt evil. I wanted to turn the lock and open the door, but stopped. I yelled, "Go away in Jesus' name," and they disappeared. Gone. I've seen one, but I'm not sure whether it's a black-eyed person or just my mind playing tricks on me. I was parked next to a lake with my ex when I saw a kid walk past our car, and they looked like they were trying to slash my tire. As you can imagine, I was really pissed, so I got out of the car and grabbed the kid. Now, I'm 6'5", so if I get out of a car looking pissed, most people would run. But this kid just stared at me, and I could tell something was wrong straight away. I told him to go away and leave us alone. He turned on the spot and walked up the lane past the old school, and I walked on the edge of the path to make sure he was really going. It was too late. He just disappeared into thin air. There was nowhere he could have hidden in the space of 5 seconds, and on one side of the lane was a lake, which was fenced off with a 6-foot railing. The other side was the stone wall of the school. There weren't trees or vegetation. He just disappeared. When I got back to my car, my girlfriend said she thought they were a little young to be doing drugs and slashing tires. When I asked why she thought they were on drugs, she said his pupils were very dilated, and she couldn't even see the white of his eyes. Then I realized why his blank stare seemed off. His eyes were black, and his eyes seemed to look into me rather than at me. I'm not sure what that entity was, whether it was a ghost, because I didn't get the feelings I get when they're around, nor did I feel uneasy, except for the stare and the disappearing act. It could have been a demon or a PK phenomena, but I've never really dealt with either of those before, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. I feel I should also give you a little background of the place I was at. The school was an old water mill where many children lost their lives during the 1800s. The lake it was next to has seen many people commit suicide or drown over the years. I believe there was a murder in the woods, which are just behind the lake too. In hindsight, it wasn't the best makeout location, but I'm normally not afraid of the paranormal. I have a healthy respect for it. That was until this incident. But until this incident, I never really felt uneasy. I had just left work and was taking a less traveled road home. Everything was going normal on a typical drive home until I came to a red light. No cars were on the road at all. Just me sitting there. Suddenly it seemed like time had stood still, and the sounds became very long drawn out. When I came to a stop, out of the darkness of the passenger side of the car, a teenager appeared. He was about 15 feet from the car. He was wearing blue jeans and a hoodie that was over his head. It appeared that he had no facial features, especially the eyes. The eyes were blacker than the darkness. I felt fear beyond explanation. I turned my gaze off the teenager and looked back towards the light when I saw what looked like his identical twin crossing the road very, very slowly in front of the car, as though to hold him up if the light had changed. The next thing I know, the boy was on the side of the car, approaching the car as if he was going to get in. I was filled with overwhelming fear and thought I was going to die. At this time, I remembered thinking, this is the angel of death. I thought about running the light and had a feeling that somehow these two strange figures were talking to each other without speaking out loud. As far as I know, the figures never touched the car. Just then, a car started approaching from behind, and the light changed. As I was leaving, I looked back and both the boys were gone. I was so frightened and thought that the two strange beings were going to show up at my house later that night. Thankfully, they did not. I posted on here about something totally unrelated to black-eyed kids, and some people wanted to know my experience with them. I don't really like going into it because I believe talking about them attracts them. So if anyone wants to know my experience, this will be my last post on it. Also, it's night here. If I don't respond, it's because I'm absolutely terrified of talking about them, not that I'm ignoring you. I was home alone on Thanksgiving, 2015, evening time, and I heard some knocking. Being in a festive and playful spirit, I opened the door without looking and automatically felt a deep sense of regret, sort of like a oh shit moment. I didn't know where it was coming from until I started actively trying to place what was wrong with the situation. And that's when I realized they didn't have any whites in their eyes. For a few seconds, I thought, isn't Halloween over? And I was confused till the oldest boy made eye contact with me. And that's when I literally felt like I was staring death in its face. They wanted to come in, and the way they spoke made it seem like they knew what I was thinking, and they were mocking my helplessness. I slammed the door on them, turned off all the lights, and started watching TV, while they just stood outside and would occasionally knock. I feel like I lost a good 6 hours of time because I didn't even remember when I fell asleep or what I was watching. I remember when I first sat down, Gabriel Iglesias was playing, but I don't remember anything. When I woke up, it was 2 a.m. and the lights were all off and static was on the TV. I had Dish Network and there were no power outages in my area, and I don't get static if my dish were to go out. I get a channel listing as HDMI or black screen. I had to literally switch the lights on and off a few times for them to work. After that day, I would occasionally see them outside, and every time I would see them, it would be pin drop silence, and my lights would occasionally go out or something would lose power, like my dish. One time my phone, that was at 63%, dropped to 1% in 5 minutes. After a few months of being afraid of every knock, I decided to call on a blessing of my house and bought a lot of items for warding off threats and put them in every room, including the bathroom. Since then, the visits have stopped. However, a few months after that, I remember hearing a blood-curdling scream. I looked through the peephole and saw nothing. A few months ago, maybe 2 or so, my mom and I heard banging coming from the front door. About 4 or 5 years ago, I was walking down a bike path in the back of my house with my stepdaughter when I saw 2 boys leaning against their bikes up ahead. I didn't really think much of it since it was a bike path until one of the kids raised his head up and looked me straight in the eye. That's when the fear struck me hard and I stopped dead in my tracks. His eyes were black and hollow, like he didn't have a soul. I was looking at pure evil. At least that's the way I describe it when I re-encountered the incident later, that evening, to my husband and my other daughter. I immediately led my stepdaughter off the path, cut through some yards, and walked to the street. I didn't know what I encountered at the time, but now I'm quite sure it was black-eyed children. I don't know what they are, but I know that they are dangerous. It was so weird. I thought my stepdaughter would also be aware of what I perceived as impending danger, but she was completely oblivious. Even when I led her off the path and onto the street, I somehow knew I needed to get out of there, now. Surprisingly, they appeared normal in every other aspect, except for their eyes, of course, and a vague awareness that didn't quite fit into the environment. I only saw the eyes of one of them, because the other kid had his back to me. He looked about 13 or 14, flannel shirt and jeans. Now that I've been reading these encounters, it piques my curiosity, but I would not want to run into them again. My friend and I were sitting up one night, having one of our insomnia talks. It's around 3 a.m., and our topic switches to one of my favorite things to talk about: paranormal and cryptids. He says one of the things he's heard about that he doesn't believe in at all, but it creeps him out, are the stories of the black-eyed children. I asked him what they are, but he says that if I'm going to go to sleep at all that night, he isn't going to go into detail, and that I should look it up the next day when I'm not planning to go to sleep anytime soon. I get home from work the next day around 8 p.m. and start looking up stories about these children and start creeping myself out. An hour or so later, the cell phone rings. Private number. I answer it, and on the other end a child asks me, "Why did you call?" Chills immediately run down my back and my neck and down to my arms, and I reply, "I didn't call anyone." The child then says, "Yes, you did." Why did you call? I'd tell it that I didn't call anyone, and not to call me again and promptly hang up. I immediately checked each door and window, and sat there on my couch for a few minutes, mentally replaying what I think is the most creepiest thing that has ever happened to me. I'm 26 years old. I served in the Army from 2007 to 2012. I'm just a normal guy with a family and a house. I'm in no way odd or weird or anything like that. I'm sure if you asked my wife, she would say differently, but that's a different story. So I'm listening to this podcast the other night, and I distinctly remember when I was around 7. There was 2 kids who came to my house and tried to make my mom let them in. These kids were no older than I was, but it just didn't seem right. It's exactly how you describe. Odd clothes, flat voice. I didn't know them, and I knew every kid within 3 blocks from the left to the right. I remember trying to see them, but my mom kept pushing me aside saying, "You need to go to your room. Now." I ran to my room with my brother, and from the room I could see the front door from around the corner, and they were gone. I remember hearing my mom and dad arguing about not letting them in and calling the police. My dad did not want them in the house, and my mom was saying he was crazy and that they were just kids. That's when my dad yelled about the eyes. When my dad yelled about the eyes, my mom said they did not have black eyes. My dad is not a man that should ever be messed with. I'm just saying he's a monster of a man. Even now, at over 60, you wouldn't mess with him. So to scare him, that just doesn't really happen. Well, that's when I hear a loud slam against my window and another 3 or 4 knocks. I go back to the window, about to hold open the blinds to see who it was, when my dad runs and shouts, "Don't let them in," and picks both me and my brother up and puts us in the bathroom. I hear him shouting to leave and that he would defend his family and that he has weapons. About 5 minutes later, my dad comes in and makes us leave the house for ice cream. He never talks about this, and when we ask him, he gets quiet and changes the subject. This story is real. I'm not making it up. I need to tell someone about this. Back in September of last year, my girlfriend and I were staying in a hotel in Atlantic City. It wasn't a large hotel casino, but it was a nice place regardless. It was early Saturday morning. We were awake and hosting another couple from Philadelphia, sharing stories and enjoying each other's company. Well, about 2 a.m., we realized that we were out of beer and we didn't really feel like calling it a night. My girlfriend told me that there were a couple of bottles of sparkling wine in the trunk of our car. She tossed me the keys and I made my way out to where the car was parked. The parking wasn't very convenient at this hotel, so we ended up in a parking spot off the side street over a block away. I could hear noises coming from the club down the street, but as I walked to my car, I found myself feeling unusually alone. I turned down the street where my car was parked. The air was very heavy, misty with a little bit of drizzly rain, and the street lamps reflected on the wet sidewalk. As I reached the car and locked the trunk, I heard a voice call out, "Sir?" I was startled, and I quickly turned around to see a teen boy who was gazing at me from a few feet away. I was really unnerved. I jumped back and said something like, "Man, you just scared the shit out of me." The boy just kept looking at me, unfazed. He appeared to be 16 or so, wearing old faded jeans and a dark hoodie. Then I noticed his eyes reflected the light off the street lamp, and they were completely black. I thought maybe he had been on drugs, causing his eyes to dilate, but he didn't seem to be high. He appeared calm and sober. Regardless, I was totally alarmed by this encounter. He then said, "I'm lost and tired. Could you give me a ride to my mom's house?" But the kid didn't look tired or worried at all. It was almost like a predator leering at its prey, and I began to feel fear. His eyes were compelling, as if the deep, cold blackness sought my attention. I sensed a vulnerable energy trying to control me. I backed off, stepped onto the curb. I uttered, "No, I can't. I have friends waiting." I kept looking down. I didn't want to look into his black eyes, feeling like an insect in a spider's web. After a few seconds, he responded, "Okay, never mind. Here come my friends." I looked past him. There were 2 young kids about a block away, and they were walking in our direction. Then I noticed they weren't walking. Their legs weren't moving. They seemed to be hovering a few inches above the sidewalk as if they were floating towards us. I freaked out and quickly turned around and ran. As I did, I heard a horrifying groan behind me. I ran faster than I ever thought was possible, directly towards the hotel. It felt like they were right behind me. I had a painful sensation of something clawing on my back, a feeling that I'll never forget. It was pure horror. When I reached the entrance to the hotel, I looked back and found myself alone. I continued to move quickly, not stopping until I was back at the room. My girlfriend and the couple were startled to see me panting and bent over in pain. They asked, "What happened? Where's the wine?" I collapsed onto the couch and didn't speak until I could catch my breath. I never told them what really happened, only that some thugs tried to attack me. I no longer felt like playing host and told the guests I wanted to call it a night. I didn't sleep a wink that night, fearing those black-eyed kids would find me. An investigation group on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation was called in to investigate and bless a home. The incident began when 2 sisters observed a black-eyed boy outside their home. Not long after, a group of white-skinned children with black eyes were seen congregating around the property in an attempt to interact with the other children living there. The first 2 occasions, there was only 2 of them, and they asked to be let inside to get some food. The 3rd time, a 3rd black-eyed kid showed up, and this is the time they asked for blood. They were never granted access to the house. The children described their voices as not normal, robotic, and monotone. Pets also went missing around this time. Many parents and children also recalled seeing the children. They also claimed to notice strange events around their home, including poltergeist activity, and sightings of at least 2 occasions that strange entities that they later thought to be aliens. My cousin and I had a very weird experience September 2011. We both lived in the town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I have been hunting and camping together since we were 12 years old. We graduated high school that spring and planned to go camping later that summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop-up camper, and we headed off. We planned to stay a week or so in a place southwest in Mackinac City, in the forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set up in a small clearing. We both thought the area looked familiar, but could not recall when we had been there. It was weird because both of us commented at the same time to each other. We didn't really have much planned to do, other than being together and hiking the area. Both of us were going to move away from home next spring, so we didn't know when we would see each other again. I'll be honest, the camping trip was a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a while. We didn't do much the first night, other than drink a few beers and talk. The next morning we decided to explore the area. We started about 10 a.m. and headed west towards the lake. We had been walking for no more than an hour when we heard someone yelling ahead of us. It didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking towards the sound. After about 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped, and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back pretty easily. We did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to our campsite late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started cooking dinner. As we sat to eat, there was a sound of something moving in the trees. There were a lot of small animals in this area, so we figured that's what it was. A few minutes later, we heard a thrashing sound, like something was swiping at a small tree and bushes. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it was, it soon stopped, but every once in a while it would start up again. Later that night, we could hear the sweeping sound coming from that same area, which really seemed odd to us. The next morning it was quiet, so we walked in the direction of the noise from the previous night. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something that had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to our campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop-up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was in there, I heard my cousin say something. I asked him what he wanted. He replied that I better get out there. I looked through the netting, and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit standing on the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man if we could help him. He smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I both looked at each other and kind of laughed. The man slowly started walking towards us, and I asked him what he wanted. He stopped walking when he was about 15 feet away from us. Right away, I noticed that his eyes were totally black and that his tracksuit was caked in mud and dirt. I asked him who he was. He smiled and said, "I'm just taking a walk and meeting people." By this time I was freaked out, and my cousin and I walked towards the pop-up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face, like he sensed that we were alarmed. So he turned back and walked into the woods. At the edge of the clearing, he stopped and turned around and said, "I'll be seeing you boys later," and started to laugh as he moved towards the woods. We didn't need another confrontation like that, so we gathered up everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We did set up at another area about 70 miles south of there, and we had a few enjoyable days. But when we get together, we still wonder out loud who the weird black-eyed man was. I've been fascinated with the supernatural world, and have had strange encounters since I was 6 years old. I am 30 now. After reading some of these stories, I'm surprised how similar they are to my own experiences. This happened July 2007 in Arlington, Texas. I was so ready to go to my lunch break because the doctor's office was extremely busy and full of patients. I walked into a nearby taco restaurant to get some fresh air and was appalled by the fact that they didn't wear gloves while preparing my food. I didn't want to eat there after that, so I just ordered a drink. I headed back to work. I was about 20 minutes away from my job, and something within me said, "Be careful, Christy." I was freaking out at that point. My mind started racing with all kinds of thoughts. Am I going to be abducted by a homeless man that lives in the woods? Am I going to get hit by a car? Is someone following me? After realizing I was safe and only 20 minutes away from my job, I calmed down. Of course, that voice came to me again. "Be careful, Christy." I looked to my left, no cars. I looked to my right, bushes that were taller than me, straight ahead sidewalk, and a corner store to the right. As soon as I passed the bushes, I saw a tall, skinny man. He had to be at least 6'8", with tan brown clothing and tan brown sandals. He was walking in the middle of the street, heading to the sidewalk I was walking on. I knew something was not right about him. He walked very slowly, like some sort of predator sneaking on his prey. What really creeped me out was, when his foot hit the pavement, it was like he weighed a ton. He was still looking straight ahead, and I couldn't keep my eyes off of him. I slowed my pace, because if I kept walking the speed I was, I would have been face to face with the man. Still watching him slowly walk as his feet hit the pavement so hard. Inside my mind, I was like, is he gonna get me? As soon as I thought of that, he turned his head really fast to his left and saw me. His eyes were black, but it was like he didn't even have any eyelids, just black sockets. I damn near had a panic attack. I walked slower, hoping he would go anywhere but near me. He turned to his right on the sidewalk that was ahead of me. His eyes were now locked onto me, and that's when his face morphed into something that looked like a demon. I walked to the corner store and did 3 laps around the store very slowly, terrified the man would hurt me. The lady at the register asked me if I was alright. I smiled and said yes, and I was only 5 minutes away from my job, so I decided to continue walking, and I left the store. When I got back on the sidewalk, I didn't see him anywhere. I frantically looked for him, could tell he was walking so slow he couldn't have gone far. I gave up looking and began to walk very fast, but slowed down when I heard it again. "Christy, be careful." I passed a business to my right, more bushes, and after the bushes, boom. To my right, the guy was standing at the building, watching me until I walked into my job. I refused to walk home after work, and I didn't walk to or from work for at least a week. I was so afraid of him finding me. I had nightmares, but forced myself to stop thinking about him. I was convinced, for some reason, that if I kept thinking about him, he'd knock on my door. I recently relocated into an independent living community, and on the second day I was introduced to a black-eyed woman, very tall, likely in her 80s. Her eyes were very large and jet black. She seemed pleasant enough in the beginning, during her small talk at the breakfast table that first day. She described herself as being 95% blind, able to only see shadows and dim lights. She told the ladies at her table that she was married 4 times. 1 marriage ended in divorce, and the 3 other marriages ended with the deaths of her husbands. Over the next few weeks of watching her, I realized she was faking disabilities. I watched her walk around without using the walker on several occasions, and she had far more visual ability than she admitted to. She could see everything she wanted to. And when I saw this ability displayed on many occasions, she made several rude, unkind, and hateful things to me in presence of others. Other residents seemed to distance themselves from her because of this. Finally, one evening in the dining room, I was sitting with a friend, not even thinking about this. Suddenly, without warning, this black-eyed woman walked up to our table and spoke my name. When I looked up, she had a large container of ice water, and she threw it in my face. She very quickly retreated to another area of the building, away from the dining room, without her walker. I was in such a state of shock, soaking wet and traumatized out of my mind, that I called 911 for the police. As soon as I could get myself relocated, I moved out. I knew it was not safe in that facility. Another interesting thing is, when she was pretending to be almost blind and helpless, I never ever saw her blink her eyes. It was a cold evening. I had my 2 nieces with me. One was 6 and the other was 8. I had gone to our family's cabin, waiting for my sister to return from town. The evening started about 7 p.m. We didn't have a key to get into the house. We waited for a couple of hours, and the girls eventually fell asleep in my truck. As the night grew later, the temperature also dropped, and I fell asleep as well. I woke up at 9:30 p.m., and it was very cold in the truck. I started the vehicle. As I pressed the brake pedal to start the truck, I noticed in the side mirror a face looking at me from the glowing taillights. I hesitated to look at first, but gathered enough courage to look. I saw a white face with long gray white hair, black eyes just looking at me. I freaked. Once I started the truck, I sped off, headed to the highway, not sure if what I saw was following us. It was. It felt as if it jumped into the bed of our truck. I turned west to head towards a town called Ganado, and went as fast as I could to my parents' house. Upon reaching the turnoff, I noticed it jump out of my truck and run along the right-of-way fence. As I pulled up to the house, I quickly carried my nieces inside. Once inside, I situated the girls for bed. Later that night, I dreamed I walked about 2 miles to my aunt's house. No one was home. As I walked back home, I noticed this thing parallel to me. I quickly ran home, went inside and locked the doors behind me, and went to bed. As I woke the next morning, I noticed sand and dirt at the foot of my bed. I told my parents what had happened and what I dreamt about. They took me to a medicine man and told me that I actually sleptwalked to my aunt's house, and when I entered the house, it followed me in. That totally freaked me out.